Well, hi everybody. I got the book back out, and we are on chapter 6. It is called Outfitting. Here goes. Even though I knew that Lonnie was sort of a lazy bum, I wished he'd show up again. I didn't know how to drive a flivver, and he'd told me he knew all about them. Besides that, he was a happy-go-lucky boy and good company, and I didn't exactly like the idea of starting out into the back country alone, particularly with a flivver. If it broke down, I wouldn't know how to fix it, and it seemed to me that a fellow would be in a pretty bad way if he were stuck like that, alone and out in the middle of a desert. I waited until the doctor said he'd release me the next day, then I took another walk down to the stockyards. Lonnie was there, sitting in the shade of the weigher's shack and talking with some cowhands I'd never seen before. He seemed as glad to see me as if I'd been his long-lost brother. I'd just come around the corner of the shack when he jumped up and came running to meet me. "Jeepers creepers, buddy," he shouted. "I figured you'd lit out for home with all that dough you made up to Wickenburg. When you didn't show up for 3-4 days, I moseyed on up there to find you, and a guy named Ted told me you'd done right good, only got skun up a little." I knew from what Lonnie said that he'd been to the movie lot, and I knew from the looks of him that he hadn't done any riding, but I asked, "Did you try your hand at the falls?" He told me. "I watched a couple of them runs, but that ain't my kind of riding. Don't mind getting spilled off a bronc, but I ain't about to let nobody tip one over on top of me. Course, if I'd been a trick rider the likes of you, I'd have tried it, but I ain't never took up that end of the business. How much dough did you make?" I didn't think there was any sense in telling him, so I just said, "Not as much as I wanted to, but maybe enough to buy a second-hand outfit and a cheap flivver." Then I told him what Jim Magee had said about driving out through the back country to find jobs and asked if he'd like to go along. It didn't take him 2 seconds to decide that he would. The first thing we did was to take his bedroll from the stockyards to my hotel room, and on the way I told him I'd planned things out. But I didn't tell him that I planned to leave 4 $50 bills in the cuff of my breeches. "The way I figure it," I said, "is that we can go as much as $130 for a flivver, an outfit, and grub and room rent until we get started. I expect the doctor to charge me about 20, and that would leave us with $14 for grub and gas on the road till we find jobs. Do you think that'll do it?" "Jeepers," Lonnie shouted. "You bet your sweet life it'll do it, buddy. Man alive, that's a fortune. This town's full of broke-down old flivvers we could buy for $40 to $50, and there ain't one of 'em so bad I can't make it good as new with $4 or $5 worth of spare parts. Second-handed stuff we can pick up at a junkyard. That would leave us 80 or 90 for outfits, and this time of year you can pick up a dang good outfit in a hot shop. Saddle, blanket, chaps, and the works for 40 to 45 bones. Jeepers, buddy, we're in the chips. You must have took the jackpot at Wickenburg." "No," I told him, "only a piece of it. Not enough to buy more than one outfit till I'm sure you're right about the price of flivvers. Remember, it's going to cost money to live till we're ready to hit the road." "Look, buddy," he asked, "do I get an outfit if I can find a flivver for $50 and fix it for 10 all in one day?" "You bet your life," I said. "As good a one as I get for myself." We spent the rest of that day and evening looking in the second-hand lots and junkyards and going to see every old jalopy that was advertised in the paper. But the only thing we could find for $50 was an old Maxwell that wouldn't run and looked as if it had been caught in a tornado. At breakfast next morning, I told Lonnie to keep on hunting while I made my last trip to the doctor, got a card filled out, and paid my bill. Then I'd meet him at our room at 10 o'clock. When I told the doctor I was leaving for the back country in a day or two, he went over me from head to heels. Then he talked to me for more than an hour, telling me that he was still inclined to agree with my family physician, but that I mustn't ride any bucking horses under any circumstances, must get all the sunshine I could on my body, and must stick rigidly to my diet. He made me promise that I wouldn't leave Phoenix without at least 50 pounds of fresh cabbage, 50 pounds of gluten flour, a case of canned salmon, 2 dozen eggs, and 10 pounds of peanuts. Then he only charged me $10 for all my visits. I think it was because I'd made him the little plaster horse. Lonnie was waiting for me when I got back to the hotel and was so excited that he began talking before I could even had the door half open. "Listen, buddy," he shouted, "I found a crackerjack of a bargain. 1914 Ford touring car, one of them that's got the brass radiator. The bloke wanted $100 for it, but he'd have took 75, and there ain't scarcely nothing wrong with it except in a couple of loose connecting rod bearings. The tires is almost to new, and with $2 worth of bad bit bearings, I could have that engine fixed up so she'd climb Pike's Peak on high. 'Twouldn't take no more than a couple of 3 hours." "Even at that," I said, "$75 sounds like a lot of money for an old flivver. Couldn't we fix that Max?" "Wait a minute there, buddy," Lonnie broke in. "The transmission, the gears you shift with, they're all shot to the devil on that Maxwell, and that's what you gotta watch out for when you go to buying an old jalopy. It would cost leastways $20 for a second-handed transmission, and it would take another 4 or 5 days to take the busted one out and put the other one in. And what would we have when I got done? Nothing, that's what. The tires on it ain't no good. Maxwell's is always bustin' down, and they drink up gas like a cow drinks water. Fords'll run all day on a gallon of gas and a spoonful of oil. You can't wear 'em out, and if anything busts, you can always fix it with a piece of balin wire. Jeepers, buddy, I'd trust that old flivver out in the desert a lot quicker than I'd trust a Rolls Royce. You come take a look at it, and I'll bet you my life you'll see the light. The flivver was in a combination garage and blacksmith shop way out at the edge of town, and when we got there it looked worse to me than the Maxwell had. It must have been a desert car all its life, and through 100 sandstorms. A coat of yellow paint had been daubed on thick over the original black, and a coat of red smeared on top of that with a broom, I think. Then it had been sandblasted until it was speckled from radiator to tailpipe, with all 3 colors showing through. The top was turned back, and I could see that the covering was stripped to tatters, and there were holes in the seats big enough for a rabbit to hide in. In hunting for some excuse for not buying it, I asked Lonnie, "How about the gear shift on this one? Are you sure it's all right?" "Gear shift," he hollowed. "Fords don't have no gear shift. They're shiftless. Work off and bands around a transmission drum." "Well, this one looks shiftless to me," I said. "This corner sags down like an old nag standing on 3 legs. "That don't amount to nothing," he told me. "Just a couple of busted leaves in the spring. You can get all of them you want for a dime apiece in any junkyard, and it don't take no time at all to put 'em in." "Well, it still looks shiftless to me," I said. "I bet it's been driven 100,000 miles. "No, it ain't. Not a bit of it," the owner of the garage told me. "This little car ain't been drove over 5,000 miles. Just took it in on a trade with old man Henderson up Cave Creek way. Trouble is, he didn't have no place to keep it. Left it stand out in the weather so the paint got chawed up a mite by the wind. Some good-for-nothing hired hand drove it over rough country, hunting strays. Busted a leaf or 2 in the springs and left it low on oil. 'Twouldn't take next to nothing to paint it into apple pie shape. Time you boys put a fresh coat of paint on it, a man couldn't scarcely tell it from new. Them war places on the seats would patch up as slick as silk with a few strips of oilcloth and a little glue, and I'd throw that in as part of the deal." The flivver still looked like a tired old nag that was on its last legs, so I shook my head and told Lonnie, "Shiftless is sure the right name for it. It's even ding-toed. Look how the front wheels turn inward." Before Lonnie could answer, the garage man called out, "Bent radius rod, that's all. Couple of swipes with a maul would straighten it right out. Told you that fool hired hand drove it over a bit of rough country." I'd heard people talk before when they'd been trying to sell something that wasn't any good, so I didn't pay any attention to the man, but said to Lonnie, "There's no sense in buying this one. It would take you a week to fix it up and wait for the paint to dry, and we can't afford to hang around Phoenix that long. Besides, you'd have to buy tools for doing a job this big." Again the garage man beat Lonnie to the punch. "Not a bit of it, not a bit of it," he told me. "You boys could fix it up right here, and I'd leave you use my tools. Wouldn't cost you a penny. I'd even lend you a hand on it so's you'd have it ready to roll by tomorrow morning." And here is the car they're checking out. It's in pretty rough shape. "That's kind of you," I said, "and maybe we'll come back to see it again, but—" I hadn't noticed Lonnie till he cut in, "Look, buddy, let's you and me take a little walk." When I glanced around, he looked as sad as a little boy who's been told he can't have a puppy he's fallen in love with, so I said, "Okay, but I'm not going to buy it, Lonnie." As soon as we were outside, Lonnie asked, "Look, buddy, didn't you ever take note how the best cutting horses usually have looks the laziest and most no account?" "Sure I have," I told him, "but what's that got to do with buying a flivver?" "Plenty," he said, "plenty. To a man that knows flivvers like I do, there's just as much feel to 'em as there is to a horse. They're either all good or no good, and a man that knows 'em don't need nobody to tell him which. I knowed that speckled one was plumb good the moment I laid eyes on her." "I'm not saying it isn't," I told him, "but for $100 I think we ought to be able to find a better one. That's a lot of money, and I'm not going to spend it till we've looked around some more and—" "Listen, buddy," Lonnie pleaded. "I can talk the bloke down to 75, and you heard him say I could use his tools and that he'd lend me a hand. With both of us working on that engine, we'd have it purring like a pussy 'fore supper time, and the looks of the body don't make no difference to us now. What we'll need in the back country is a car with an engine we can trust. There's no sense stopping to do a paint job till we're on our way. I can do that and patch up them holes in the seats any time along the road. When I get through with her, she'll look and run like she just come out of the factory. How about it, buddy? I'm telling you, we couldn't do no better if we was to waste a month's time hunting." There did seem to be some sense in what Lonnie said, and it would cost money for every extra day we spent in Phoenix. So I told him, "All right, Lonnie, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you can buy that one for $75 and you can have it all fixed up and ready to roll tomorrow noon, I'll go along with the deal, but not for 1 penny more. Is that fair enough?" Lonnie was hurrying back into the garage before I had the last words out of my mouth. Fair enough, he sang out. "I'll guarantee you'll never live to regret it, buddy. Now you watch your old uncle drive a sharp deal." I think the look on Lonnie's face ruined his deal the minute he stepped back into that garage. He haggled for more than an hour with the owner, and the lowest they ever got was $85. When I was sure that was the best deal he could make, I said, "Come on, Lonnie, we've wasted enough time here." As I said it, I turned around and walked out of the place, but I hadn't gone 50 feet before Lonnie caught up with me. "Listen, buddy," he said as he trailed along at my elbow. "I had him right on the edge of a deal when you busted it up. And besides, what's a 10 spot to a guy like you anyways? The work I'll get out of the bloke will be worth double that. You know these mechanics charge $1.50 an hour for their time." "Sure, I know it," I said, "and he'd probably run us up a bill of 20 or more before we even got out of there." Not a penny. That's part of the deal," Lonnie told me. "He ain't gonna charge us a nickel for nothing, just the dough we pay him for the flivver, and he'll furnish all the spare parts we need." I kept right on walking, and I said, "No deal. I wouldn't trust that man any further than I could reach him with a throw rope. He's lied to you 40 times and in 40 different ways during the last hour. I'd walk before I'd pay him $85 for that old pile of junk." Lonnie caught hold of my arm and looked at me like a puppy that's begging for a cookie. "Listen, buddy," he said. "Leave me by it, and I'll pay you back the extra 10 spot out of my first paycheck when we get a job. I'll do better than that. I'll go halvers on the flivver, and on the gas and oil, and on the grub bill. Listen, buddy, I didn't never mean for you to buy me no outfit and give it to me. Tell you what, I'll just keep a fiver for myself each payday till you're all paid back, clean as a whistle." I didn't expect Lonnie to pay me back, but he seemed to have fallen in love with that old rattletrap Ford, and I didn't have the heart to tell him he couldn't have it. I just passed him my roll and said, "That's fair enough, and since you're making the deal, it'll look better for you to do the paying. But have the bill of sale made out in my name. I'll make a new one, putting shiftless into partnership when you pay me back the first $5. Lonnie grabbed the bills and ran, and he was already peeling the 85 off our little roll by the time I got back to the garage. I don't know which looked the happiest, he or the garage owner. It was noon by the time the bill of sale was made out, and the motor vehicle office was right near Larson's restaurant, so I told Lonnie we'd better go and have the flivver registered, buy a license, and eat our lunch right away. He told me, "I ain't hungry. I had a big breakfast, and it'll hold me over till supper time. You go on down while I and Joe fix up them connectin' rod bearings. We'll have to hump right along to get 'em finished for closing time." When Joe, the garage owner, went to his truck for his lunch pail, Lonnie slipped me what was left of our roll and whispered, "Say, buddy, while you're down that way, why don't you mosey around to the hawk shops and see what you can find for outfits? Look, you don't need to get me as good a one as you got for yourself. Just so's it's got good stirrups and a horn to snub a rope onto, that's all I need. There's no sense you bothering about chaps for me. My legs don't skin up easy, and there's no tellin' we'll be workin' brush country anyways. Understand, buddy, I ain't trying to rush you none. Just figured it would be a shame, us having to hold up and hunt outfits tomorrow after we're all set and ready to roll. It don't make no never minds if you ain't back before dark, 'cause you couldn't do no good here no ways. It takes a real mechanic to work on automobiles. Kinda like a watch. A man's got to know what he's about before he goes to fussin' with 'em." I had better luck than I expected with the license. Because a quarter of December was past and the 1919 plates had gone on sale, the clerk told me I'd only need to buy one for the new year. Even at that, I began finding out there were more costs to automobiles than just the buying price of gasoline, but I didn't begrudge the expense. I was more proud to be the registered owner of an automobile than of the automobile itself. Before I went to hunt for outfits, I took the ownership ticket to Mr. Larson, so there would be no chance of my losing it. Mr. Larson didn't come right out and tell me we'd been stuck when I told him about the Ford and what we'd paid for it, but he asked me dozens of questions I didn't know anything about. Were there any shorts in the magneto? Were the cylinder walls scored? And was I sure the crankshaft hadn't been worn egg-shaped? When I said I'd never even heard of a magneto, he hunched his shoulders and spread his hands as much as to say, "Well, you've been caught for a sucker, but it's too late to do anything about it now." Then he said if we were going to leave early the next morning, I'd better let him order the groceries the doctor had told me to take with us. I told him I'd appreciate his ordering the stuff, but I forgot to ask how much it would cost. To me, an automobile was only a collection of dead iron parts, but a saddle was a living thing, almost a part of a cowhand himself. Each one is different in some way from any other, particularly after it's been used a year or two, and a man with a saddle that is wrong for him can be as out of luck as if he were trying to work cattle bareback. If it's right, his behind will cuddle into the hollow of the cantle securely, and no matter how hard a bull hits the end of a line or a pony pitches, he'll be topside when the fun is over. Then, too, a saddle talks. On night herd, it whispers at every step of the pony just to let a cowhand know he's not alone. I was thinking all these things when I left the restaurant and headed for the back streets where the pawn shops were, and the more I thought, the faster I found myself walking. That's what saved me from getting cheated on our outfits. It made me remember how Lonnie had clutched my roll and run back to the garage to buy shiftless. Common sense told me that we could have bought that old heap for half the price if he hadn't shown from the very start how much he wanted it. I made up my mind I'd see every saddle in every pawn shop in Phoenix before I bought one, and the more I liked any one of them, the less I'd show it. The first shop I went into had at least 30 saddles displayed in a long row, and the pawnbroker led me straight to one at the center of the line. I was hooked as quickly as Lonnie had been hooked by Shiftless. There in front of me was exactly the saddle I wanted, the only saddle I wanted. It was an Oregon half-breed with the back ring hung straight down beside the cantle so the saddle could be used with or without a flank cinch. The whole outfit yelled custom made. The cantle was low and sloping, the fork just wide enough for my thin shanks to cling to, and the short seat curved upward enough in meeting it to make a neat pocket. It would have cramped a heavy rider, but was exactly the right size for my skinny behind to fit into. Over the well-shaped but not too high horn hung a split-ear bridle with a light spade bit and braided rawhide reins. I think I could have moved on from any other saddle in the place without a word from the little shopkeeper, but when I passed up the half-breed, he grabbed me by the sleeve and pulled me back. He wanted me to feel the tooling, twisted a stirrup to show me how pliable it was, and started giving me a long story about having paid $200 for the saddle. When I pulled away, he caught my sleeve again and told me because it was the off-season, he'd sacrificed both the saddle and bridle for $75. You're making your sacrifice at the wrong altar and in the wrong town, I told him. That's an old Oregon half-breed, probably older than I am, and it was custom made for a midget. You couldn't find an Arizona cowhand who would give you $5 for it, but I'll give you $10 if you want to get rid of it. $60, he shouted like an auctioneer who senses a rising bid. Then $50 as he tried to pull me back. I only shook my head and walked out of the shop. And here's Ralph arguing with the shopkeeper about the saddle. From there I went to every pawn shop in Phoenix and did a little haggling in every one just to get in some practice and find out exactly how much they'd come down before letting me walk out. I found that 30% was just about the limit. If an outfit was priced at $100, I could have bought it for about $70, and if it was priced at $50, I could have it for $35. I waited for about an hour before closing time, then headed back to the shop where I'd seen the Oregon half-breed. The little shopkeeper pounced on me like a hungry cat on a fat mouse. He grabbed my sleeve and dragged me straight down the road to that half-breed saddle, and that time he tried to start the haggling at $50. There was only one thing I could do. I shook my head without more than glancing at the saddle, then pulled away and went to look at a real good double-rigged job farther up the row. He started off with $60 on that one, but I turned my mouth down and said $30, with a bridle, blanket, and chaps. For a moment or two, I thought the little man was having a stroke of apoplexy. He shouted at me in such broken English I couldn't understand a word, then scurried around the shop like an insane pack rat. First he pawed over a stack of saddle blankets till he found one that was fairly good. He slapped it down on top of the half-breed saddle, glared up at me, and yelled, $50. I only shook my head and kept on examining the double rigger. It was a better saddle than I'd thought at first. Not more than a year old, and exactly the right kind of saddle for a fellow built like Lonnie. I made up my mind I'd buy it for him, even if I had to go as much as $50 or $55 for it. That is, with the rest of the outfit. If I hadn't really liked that saddle. Oh, there's the garbage truck. Let's wait a second for it to go away. So while it's making its noise, we will again look at the shopkeeper, because he really wants to sell that saddle. Squeak. Da-da-da. And now I've lost my place on the page. Come on, truck. Do-do-do-do-do. Alrighty. If I hadn't really liked that saddle, I might have had trouble keeping my eyes turned away from the half-breed, and could have ruined my deal. But instead of paying any attention to the shopkeeper, I went over and began sorting through the pile of saddle blankets. At first I think he had the idea I didn't like the blanket he'd put on the half-breed and was hunting for a better one. He stood rubbing his hands together and grinning while I pawed nearly to the bottom of the stack and pulled out a real fine Navajo. Then he went wild again when I carried it to the double rigger, tossed it on, and said $32.50. He rushed toward me, snatched up the Navajo blanket, ran to exchange it for the poorer one he'd put on the half-breed, whirled around, and yelled 50. When I turned my mouth down, he snatched a fairly good pair of cowhide chaps from a peg, tossed them on top of the Navajo, and again yelled 50. I didn't even bother to turn my mouth down that time, but hunted around till I'd found a better pair of chaps, laid them across the double rigger, and said 35. I did the same when the little man added a slicker to the heap on the Oregon saddle. And as he added a throw rope and spurs, I did too, but I always hunted until I'd found something a little better than what he'd added. Each time he tossed something on the half-breed and yelled 50. There's that truck again. La 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 la. Alrighty, away it goes. Each time he tossed something on the half-breed, he yelled 50, and each time I tossed something better on the double rigger, I went up 50 cents or $1 on my offer. I knew it must be way past his regular closing time when the shopkeeper gave up trying to sell me the Oregon saddle, and I knew I'd just about run out my string. His shoulders drooped. He came up to where I was beside the double rigger, examined everything I'd put on it, and said, 65, final. I was sure it was awfully close to it, and that I'd have to make my move right then or he'd throw up his hands and walk away. Well, I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you $85 for both outfits together, but I won't buy one without the other. Half an hour later, we made our deal at $87.25. It was more money than I'd intended to spend, but I wasn't a bit sorry. We'd have outfits that were a lot better than the average, and a good rancher will usually hire a cowhand quicker if he has a good outfit than if he has a poor one. With jobs scarce as they were, it seemed to me that the few extra dollars were well invested. And that is the end of Chapter 6. Bye-bye, everybody.